We're talking today with Charles Aldrich of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. And Mr. Aldrich, can you start with some background on yourself? And to begin with, where and when were you born?
Well, I was born on February the 7th, 1925 in the Pencock Hospital in Hastings.
Okay. And where did your family live at that time?
Well, they lived in Hastings, and then after leaving Hastings, they lived on a farm over in what's called the Burris property. That was in the Snow School District. And then after a few years on the farm, we moved over in what they call the Cascade area.
Mm-hmm. So southeast of Grand Rapids?
Southeast, near the Thornapple River.
Okay.
And PM Railroad track.
Okay. Now, were they farmers or did they do other work?
We rented the property. We had our own gardens and everything. Our animals are cows and chickens, and we grew all of our own vegetables, and which we consumed during a year.
Mm-hmm.
And my brothers picked apples and peaches for the man that owned the property.
Now, were you farming part of that property yourselves?
Just the big gardens
Okay.
that we had.
All right.
Not really farming, just for our own personal use of the vegetables. And big garden.
Okay. And then did your father do anything else to make money?
That was back in the 30s.
Right.
He odd jobs, helping with the apples and the peaches. And back in them days, they had what they called a WPA, and we were on that for a number of years, I think.
So they did sort of construction projects and infrastructure things and built bridges and roads and...
Right.
Okay.
He more or less, well, he had a team of horses and he mowed the grass with a mower along the road, and then he worked on the highway projects. And one of them was down by where the Woodland Mall is now. That's where he signed me up to enlist in the Navy.
All right. So before we get there, you mentioned you had brothers. Were your brothers older than you?
I have two brothers that are younger than me. They're twins.
Okay.
And the rest of them are all older. There was 8 boys altogether.
Wow.
And the oldest one was born in 1911. So they're all about 2 years apart.
Mm-hmm. All right. So some of them were already out of the house and working and so forth before you left.
Right.
Okay.
They were, well, my one brother stood in line at the General Motors plant on 36th Street to get a job. And the oldest one was a delivery man for bread and cakes and stuff like that for Colonial Bakery Company. So they all had odd jobs, anything they could pick up.
Right. Okay. Now, did any of them enter the service before you did?
My one brother, Harold, was in the Air Force at South Ridge Field down by Detroit. And he enlisted in the Air Force. He was in a couple of years. in the Air Force.
All right. Now, then I guess did he then serve during the war?
No. And one brother too was in what they call the 3 Cs.
Okay, Civilian Conservation Corps.
Right.
Right.
And he was in that for a couple of years.
All right. And then to go back to your story, do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor and how you learned about that?
Well, most of our information came from the Grand Rapids Herald, and my dad would pass around any information that he knew, and that's how we found out about Pearl Harbor.
So you didn't have a radio in your house?
We didn't even have electricity,
Mm-hmm.
so we had the lamps that we used, so.
All right. Okay. Now, how old were you when you enlisted in the Navy?
I was turned 17 on February the 7th, and I enlisted May the 12th, 1942.
Okay. Now, why did you decide to enlist?
Well, I didn't finish high school, and I didn't have anything particular to do, so I more or less decided that I'd go down and enlist in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
It came right into my mind right to the start.
Now, why did you choose the Navy?
Who knows? I just more or less picked the Navy, and that was, well, my brother was in the Air Force,
Mm-hmm.
and he knew about the Army, but I just sort of chose the Navy.
Okay. All right. So you enlisted in the Navy. Now, because you mentioned your father took you to the recruiting office.
He, on the way to work, he dropped me off at the recruiting station at Reed's Lake, and then I went to the physical and got the papers okayed by my dad, where he was on the job at WPA, and then I went back to the recruiting station, and they said I could go home if I wanted to. I said, for what? So they got on the train and they took me to Detroit
Mm-hmm.
for another physical and to do more paperwork. And after a night stay in Detroit, they put you on the train and sent you to Great Lakes. So that's where I ended up, in Great Lakes, in May the 12th,
Okay.
1942.
All right. And that's out just like north of Chicago or in Chicago?
North of Chicago.
Yeah. All right. Now, when you got there, when you got out to Great Lakes, what do you remember about the base? I mean, like, what did it look like, or how big was it, or what was going on?
Well, it was quite a mammoth place.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of white barracks, big white barracks, and they had the upper level and the lower level, and they were all more or less attached to each other with a walkway between them, and they had their own wash rooms where you could wash your uniforms and things like that. Then they had your what you call the mess hall, and had an area where you could go and call home from what you call it, a canteen.
Mm-hmm.
And so you was busy from the time you got up in the morning till you went to bed at night, marching or whatever, or going to classes.
Now, what would they give you classes about? What do they teach you?
Well, a lot of it, I think, we just more or less the Navy procedures and stuff like that, and marching from one place to another.
Right. Did they put a lot of emphasis on discipline and following orders and that kind of thing?
They tried to instill that on their members, that they had what they called a Blue Jacket manual that you were supposed to read and know the rules and regulations. And then on Sunday they'd march you over to another base to go to church. And they had Catholic church and a Protestant church. So you could go to whichever one you was a member of. And at the final 5 weeks of training, they put you in a outgoing unit, what they called OGU, and wait for assignment to another training station.
Okay. So you were only doing sort of that initial training for 5 weeks.
Right.
Okay. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to life in the Navy, learning to follow their rules and do it their way?
Well, I didn't find it too difficult. It was just like having a job.
Mm-hmm.
You just more or less went along with whatever was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And if he told you to do this or do that, you just more or less followed orders.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't complain, even though you might have wanted to complain, but you didn't. And you just did what you was assigned to do.
Okay. Now, were there some guys who had trouble with that?
Quite a few.
What would happen with them?
They would decide they didn't want to be in the Navy and wanted to go home or someplace, and they'd jump the fence and head out on their own for home or wherever they wanted to go. And usually they were caught a little later on and sent to the brig, put on trial, given a court-martial, and put on trial.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And then would they just join another group going through training again?
I would think so, that unless they got too difficult, they might have discharged them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But you got through your 5 weeks, okay. What did they do with you after those first 5 weeks?
After a week in OGU,
Mm-hmm.
I was assigned to Little Creek, Virginia. It's near Norfolk.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a gunnery school. And in the gunnery school, you were given different types of training on different types of guns, machine guns, and bigger anti-aircraft guns, and surface guns.
Okay. And so, do you remember sort of how big the guns got that you trained on? Because they had 20 millimeter, 40 millimeter, 75 millimeter, 105.
Well, some are machine guns,
Mm-hmm.
like the 50 caliber machine guns, and 20 caliber machine guns, and 5H 30 or 3H 50
Mm-hmm.
anti-aircraft gun,
Right.
and 4H 50 the surface gun.
Mm-hmm.
But the 4H 50 was a powder gun, so it was a little more complicated than the 3H 50 because you had a powder bag and a projectile that you shot.
So you're not putting just one shell in that just fires. You have to load up the powder separately and then have the projectile in there as well.
Yeah, you put in a projectile, and then you put a powder bag in behind it, and then they close the breech, and they put a little, like a 30 caliber shell in the breech, and when the gun fired, that 30 caliber set off the powder bag.
Right. Okay. Now, was this gunnery training, would this be for service on all Navy ships or only certain kinds of ships?
Well, it could be used on other ships, regular Navy ships, but merchant ships were the guns that we were being trained for.
So you were with a group of men who were being trained to be Navy guards on merchant ships? Was that what you were all there for?
That was the general purpose of being trained on these guns, were to be members of the Navy Armed Guard gun crew on a merchant ship.
Right. So basically the Navy at this point has sorted out where people are going. And so your group are training to be part of the Naval Armed Guard. Other guys would go to surface warships or submarines or other places.
Well, most of them that I know of from Little Creek were assigned to the merchant ship.
Right. Okay. How long did you spend at Little Creek?
I would say maybe 4 weeks.
Okay, so not too long.
No.
All right. Did you ever get a chance to go off the base there, or did you just stay where you were?
No, we could take liberty, and we were allowed to go into Norfolk, and they had a place which is called Virginia Beach. That was more or less for swimming, and they had big beaches there.
Did the people in Norfolk has a lot of naval personnel? It's a big naval base. How did the people in the town treat the sailors?
They weren't their favoritism of sailors wasn't too great, because there was so many around that sort of disrupted their families, and some of the sailors probably made it miserable for others because they too much rowdyism and drinking and alcoholic beverages. You can get alcoholic beverages.
Yep.
You know, and at Ocean View they had an entertainment like where you could ride
It's like an amusement park?
music. Yeah, this is like an amusement park, and you could enjoy yourself there. So it was all right on the Chesapeake Bay. So you was getting a little taste of salt water when you was in the ocean there, Chesapeake Bay.
Now, when you were at Great Lakes or training at Little Creek, did they actually put you on boats and take you out to Lake Michigan or out in Chesapeake Bay?
That was supposed to be the general idea, but their boat was broke down at that time, so they couldn't do that.
Yeah. Now, before they actually put you on a merchant ship, had you ever been out on any kind of boat out on the water before? Had you ever sailed on Lake Michigan or anything like that?
No, not really. No, I'd never been on Lake Michigan or been on small lakes, but not no big lake.
Okay, so this was all pretty new then.
Right.
Okay, so you do your training then at Little Creek. What happens to you next?
We were taken on a ferry from Little Creek over to Newport News, and they put us on a train and sent us to New York. And when we got to New York, we were assigned to the Armed Guard Center in Brooklyn. And that was where all the men that had been trained in Little Creek were stationed until they were assigned to a ship. And you, while you was waiting your turn, you had the privilege of traveling around in New York and visiting Times Square and wherever you happened to felt like going. So you got a chance to visit different parts of New York City.
Now, how long did you have to wait before you got on a ship?
I'm not too familiar with that. Some of it's here someplace.
I think it's this one. Let's see. Yeah, this looks like your itinerary here. Little Creek, Brooklyn.
Yeah, it's from
So not too long. It looks like if you get there
No,
on
it's
July
July
30th and ship out on August 4th.
sent to Little Creek, Virginia, July the 3rd, 1942.
Yeah, and then it says you go to Brooklyn on July 30th.
And on July the 30th, that's about 4 weeks.
Yeah, that's your 4 weeks, and then you only have about 4 or 5 days there before you're on a ship.
Sent to South Brooklyn, New York. And like I say, we were the privilege of traveling around New York
Right.
City. And so, well, I was only in the Armed Guard Center from July the 30th to August the 4th.
Right.
When I went aboard the John Penn.
Now, what kind of ship was the John Penn?
The John Penn was a Liberty ship. It carried a cargo of what they call Lend-Lease material. And it was went out of New York to Halifax, Canada, where it picked up more ships. Everybody gathered in Halifax, and then they assembled out in the ocean. Then they were on Scotland, northern Scotland, and that's where they waited their time to get orders to proceed on to Merman.
Okay. Now, let's back up a little bit. Let's go back to you're getting on board the ship. What do you remember about first going on the ship?
There wasn't too much to remember. There was, we were a replacement. There was only 2 of us.
Okay.
We were replacements for somebody that evidently got sick or whatever and got taken off. So we were told that to get our sea bags and all our equipment together about 8 o'clock at night. And we were getting aboard the ship in the dark about 10 o'clock. And so everything was in the dark. I didn't even really know where I was at until the morning.
Okay. Now, that first night, did they just put you in a bunk and say, get up at a certain hour?
Yeah, they put us in a bunk, and they usually have petty officers that get you up in the morning, reveille, whatever you want to call it.
Now, how many men were in the armed guard on that ship?
Offhand, I think it was about 34.
Okay. And do you remember how many guns it carried, or about how many?
How many guns?
Yeah.
Well, it was 8 20 millimeter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, 2 on the bow, 2 on the stern, and 4 on the bridge. And they had they had a 30 caliber on the railing on the bridge. But the bow gun was a 3-inch 50 and an anti-aircraft gun. It was surface and anti-aircraft. And the stern gun was a 4-inch 50. That was a surface gun. It couldn't elevate enough to shoot airplanes.
Okay.
It was just meant for submarines and stuff like that.
Right. Okay. Now, was those 34 men, was that just enough to man those guns, or did you have extra men who could be replacements, or how did that work?
Well, we took turns standing watch, 4-hour watches, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. And they have gun watches. And like the bow gun, the stern gun.
Now, would there be enough men on the gun watches to actually operate the guns if they needed to, or would you have to bring up the rest of the guys?
Well, if there was any action, you would have to sound general quarter. The alarm would go off and tell you to get to your gun.
Okay. What kind of accommodations did they have for you on a Liberty ship? How did they pack you in?
Well, we had bunks, and somewhere on the bridge, underneath the bridge, and somewhere in the stern. And there'd be maybe 4 to an area. They had an upper bunk and a lower bunk on each side of the room. So there'd be about 4 in a room. And you'd have your own locker and where to store your clothes and your sleeping bag, or your ditty bag, or sea bag, what they call it.
And then, did you eat what the crew ate, or did the guards eat separately from the Merchant Marine crew?
We had our own lunchroom. The gun crews had their own lunchroom, and the Merchant Marine had their own lunchroom, and we had our own what you call a mess boy. We just, like you do in a restaurant, we sit down at the table and he delivered the food to us.
Okay.
And it was all real good food.
And then he was known for that. Yeah.
Nothing bad about it. It was all real good food.
Did you have better food than the Merchant Marine crew had?
I would not know that, but I imagine they ate the same thing we did.
All right. Now, when you guys first got on the ship, did you get seasick?
I don't remember whether anybody really got seasick or not. I did once, and that was on the way to Mermaid.
So was that just in really bad weather?
We run into a 72-mile-an-hour gale, and the ship was doing a 35-degree lift, and I was on watch on the 3-inch 50 on the bow, and I was getting sprayed with ocean water, and they told me I better come back on the bridge. It was getting pretty bad, and we had lost one of our lifeboats, on the port side. It just pulled the steel girders right loose from the deck, dumped it right into the ocean, and that's when I got seasick. That was the first time and the last time.
Okay. All right. Now, on that convoy run up to Halifax and then Halifax over to Scotland, did you have any U-boat scares or any problems on the way over?
We did not have any, the ocean was beautiful. I mean, it's just as smooth as you could find any place.
Okay.
And we had no problems.
Okay, so the Germans didn't find you on that part?
No.
All right. But then you assemble at Scotland, and now you're going to join a convoy that's going to head up over Norway and Finland and over to Russia, over to Murmansk or to Archangel. Which convoy was that you were joining then?
Well, I said we didn't have any problems going over. We did have one problem. That was fog. Coming into around British Isles. The fog was so thick you couldn't see one ship from another. So your convoy was all lined up. When that fog would come in, you couldn't see nothing. So by the time the fog cleared, one ship way over here, one ship way over there, so you had to get the convoy all lined up again to get on the way to make sure everybody was there.
Right.
But that was the only difficult problem we had, was the fog around the British Isles.
Okay. So then you get to the British Isles, and then they put you into a convoy to head over now to the Soviet Union.
Right.
Okay. What was the name or the number of that convoy?
That was PQ-18.
So it's going just right after PQ-17 that's particularly famous.
Right.
But now what happened with PQ-18? Now tell us the story here of your attempt to get to Russia.
Well, PQ-18 was escorted by a number of British destroyers, and we had a British cruiser was in convoy, and they said there was a baby flat top. I didn't see that, but there was a baby flat top with it, and we had our own convoy master that was in charge of the convoy. And so then out of Scotland, that was when we ran into the 72-mile-an-hour gale off in Iceland. And we went up around Iceland, and that's when we made our turn towards Birmingham.
Now, did you encounter any German submarines on that trip?
In the morning of September the 13th, 2 ships were hit on the starboard stern side of the convoy, and they sunk within about 15 minutes. And they were what they called Panamanian ships. They were slower ships, and they both were sunk in a matter of 15 minutes. And evidently the submarine came up into the convoy, right underneath the convoy, and the British destroyer comes through and depth charges where the submarine was, and oil and debris came to the surface. So I imagine that was the submarine was hit and sunk.
Mm-hmm.
Because we didn't have no more problems with that submarine.
Right. Okay. And then what happens then later in the day?
So about after everybody had their lunch at noon, we went back on watch, and about, I would say approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a bunch of what they call Ju-88s came out and dropped torpedoes on the starboard side of the convoy, which got a number of ships, and the John Penn was one of them.
Now, before that happened, did any of the German bombers get hit or shot down? Were you shooting at them with your gun?
I was a first loader on the 3H-50.
Mm-hmm.
So my job was to put a new shell in every time they fired it. And we had one of the men in the Merchant Marines. He was what they called a hot shellman. And his job was to, when the gun fired the shell, to get this hot shell and get rid of it.
It's like the shell casing, or?
Yeah, hot shell casing. He had asbestos gloves. And then I had another man would hand me another shell, and I would load it. So we worked it together, and so quick they fired it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd turn around and get another shell, load it into the gun. Well, after numerous firings, the gun was blocking my view,
Mm-hmm.
so I couldn't see nothing.
But do you know if your gun hit anything?
After numerous firings, they lowered the gun down on the surface level,
Mm-hmm.
and they started going over to the port side of the ship, port bow, and I loaded the shell in, and when I loaded the shell in, I stepped sideways, and I could see this bomber flying over the convoy. And they fired the gun, and that bomber blew pieces flying every which direction. So it was a direct hit. That shell hit them right directly and blew them all to pieces. You could see the motor and all pieces of the airplane flying all over the place.
And now how much longer after that was it when your ship got hit, do you think?
Just a matter of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine that he was the one that dropped the torpedo. He was getting out of the way, he dropped the torpedo, and that we dropped him, and then he hit us with a torpedo. So,
all right. So now, what do you remember then about that? You're on the ship. Did you know that? Did you see a torpedo coming from where you were, or?
well, no, I was watching off in the opposite direction, and the torpedo hit on the starboard side in the engine room, and I was looking off to the port bow, but I could feel the ship raise up in the air, then drop back down in the water, and that was when it started listing to the starboard side. And they, in a matter of minutes, they announced the abandoned ship. And because I couldn't hear nothing, I didn't hear them holler that, so I turned around, everybody was running. And where the heck they going? And I thought, oh, they're getting out of here. So I decided I better get back there and get on the life raft.
Mm-hmm.
But by the time we get back to midships, the bridge, all the rafts, the boats were gone. I mean, there was 5 of us, didn't have no place to get on, no raft, no boat or nothing.
So that lifeboat you lost earlier, maybe you could have used.
So, right. But there was one that was hanging when pulleys, rope pulleys, they had them hanging on, they had cut one of the pulleys and it was hanging down towards the water, and back into the boat was up in the air, and so I decided that if we wanted something to get onto, to get off the ship, we better see if that lifeboat would float. Well, we dropped it in the water and it floated. They got a air tank in them, so the air tank kept the boat up. It had a hole in it from the shrapnel, and it sunk right into the water, filled up the water, so we were sitting in a lifeboat, but it was full of water. So we, from the waist down, we were all wet. From the waist up, we were dry.
How cold was the water?
Well, it was snowing, and we was getting a few snow showers off of that, so it was pretty cold. And I was, by the time they picked us up, I was more or less sort of paralyzed down in the lower part of my body, my legs and feet.
So how was it that you were rescued?
That was when rescue ships evidently were patrolling around and trying to find people. And the British destroyer came over and they picked everybody out of our lifeboat and put us aboard the ship. And well, I had done what's called a Navy foul weather gear. They had a hood and snow pants and coat, and on top of that I had a sheepskin coat, and on top of that I had a life jacket. So I was pretty well loaded with clothing.
And was it all soaked now?
Well, there was a lot of oil in the water, so the oil was from my waist down, and my sheepskin coat had oil in it. So they just grabbed me by the collar of that sheepskin coat and pulled me up on deck. And after they took my sheepskin coat and stuff off, they knew we hadn't had anything to eat, so they took us to a mess hall and give us something to eat.
Were your legs working yet?
They were starting to get warmed up again, and they helped me walk around for a little bit. And in fact, they didn't know my rank. They thought maybe I was a Navy officer, because one of them was a Navy officer. And so I went down to the mess hall and ate with the officer. So after they found out that I was just a seaman, they put me up with the rest of the crew.
But you had a short promotion.
Right.
All right.
I got a meal, but I had a short promotion.
Okay. Now, do you remember what they did with you after that? They pulled you out of the water, they fed you. Do you stay with the convoy now, or do you go off somewhere else?
No, we were far enough into the Russian territory that the British escort left the convoy, and the Russian took over the escorting the convoy.
Okay.
So we didn't go all the way into Mermaid.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that was the regulation.
Right.
And so there was 7 British destroyers all got their formation together and headed back for Scotland. So they did their zigzagging, their maneuver, and so when we got back to Iceland, they stopped and refueled, and then they proceeded on to Scaffer Flow
Mm-hmm.
in northern Scotland.
So did you actually get off the ship then and go on land, or just change ships?
We got off the destroyers in Scaffer Flow, and they put us aboard the train in Scaffer Flow.
Well, Scapa Flow's on an island, so.
Well, I mean, yeah,
But they took you down to the north coast of Scotland itself and put you on a train?
right.
Yeah, okay.
It was in the Scaffer Flow area,
Okay.
but they took us off in the ship and put us on a train, and that was when they headed south to Glasgow. And well, on the British destroyer, when they took my oil-soaked clothes, they gave me a British soldier's pants which were too short, and then I had those until they got me some new uniforms in Scotland, and when we got to Glasgow, they took us to a place what they call the Red Cross Center, and we stayed there for a week, and that's when they gave me a British uniform. And while we was in Scotland, we were free to travel around Glasgow for a little while, and then that's when they transferred us to Glasgow, to Roseneath. It was a training base for the Marines. So that was where we were supposed to stay until we got reassigned again.
So how long did you stay there, do you think? Well, do you remember much about the place, or anything you did while you were there?
Well, Roseneath was what they call Roseneath Castle, and there was a castle there, a regular Scottish castle, but it was used as a training base by the Marines, and that was supposed to be our temporary barracks until we were reassigned to, we were supposed to go back to Brooklyn, New York, because that was the method of if you got sunk, your next assignment was Brooklyn, New York. So in the process of waiting, We were marching around with the Marines, and we thought, well, maybe that's just to keep us busy during the day.
Now, were these British Marines or American ones?
There was United States Marines, and so we had Navy shoes, and Navy shoes are not built for marching. So they said, we better give them some different shoes. They took us and got us some Army shoes, which were thicker sole. Then they give us an M1, a 30 caliber
Rifle, yeah.
rifle. And what's going on here? What's they doing with a rifle? And they marched us around, and later on they took us to a place where we could shoot the M1s, and they showed us how to fire them and load them, unload them. And in the process of one day to another, my buddy and I would take a bus to Glasgow and ride the bus back in the morning and go back out on the marching again. So we did that until they cut out our liberty. No more liberty. So we ended up packing our sea bag and going down to the dock. I thought maybe we're going to head back to Brooklyn. Well, we're not heading for Brooklyn. There was 30 that they had drafted into this group. They were 30 short, so they drafted 30 armed guards on this new assignment. So that was when we were headed for Oran, North Africa, through the Straits of Gibraltar and down into the Mediterranean.
Now, what kind of ship did they put you on this time?
It was a troop ship.
Mm-hmm.
It was, the name of it was Nevada Castle. It was a British troop transport.
Mm-hmm. Now, were they carrying British troops or American troops?
They were carrying both.
Okay.
They had I imagine British and Scottish, whatever, they were being assigned to that same area.
Mm-hmm.
So then I got into Iran the 11th of November 1942, and the invasion war or fireworks, it was already over with. There was a few snipers yet.
Mm-hmm.
And they had problems with snipers when we got there, but there was no actual combat.
Right. Because that was about a week earlier that the first landings had taken place, and they had to deal with the French troops who were there.
Right. We were sort of a backup.
Right. Okay. Now, did you get to go ashore at Iran?
My duty, well, actually in the Oran harbor, the French had sunk a bunch of cargo ships,
Mm-hmm.
and they were scuttled. They were sitting on the bottom, and they had to be transported, or they had to be raised
Mm-hmm.
and hauled out of there in order to make room to bring in supply ships.
Right.
So my duty was to go from Iran to Mir al-Kabir to from one harbor to another harbor with a LCM, which is a landing craft mechanized.
Yeah. That's not a very big craft, is
No.
it? That's like a tank and
It's,
some men or whatever. Yeah.
It's for hauling tanks
Mhm.
and trucks. It's not a very big boat,
Mhm.
but it has 2 motors in it, and I was the operator of that LCM. And my duty was to go back and forth between the harbors and pick up supplies off the merchant ships and bring them back into Iran to put in the warehouse.
Right. How far was it between Iran and Mers el-Kabir? Or how long would it take you to get there?
I would say the distance probably about maybe a mile and a half,
Okay, so they're close together.
2 miles, something like that.
Okay.
And it wasn't a very long trip. And it took more time to load up and unload than it did to
Mhm.
make the trip. But after they cleared the Iran harbor, then they could bring in the big merchant ships and unload right in Iran.
So how long do you think you spent doing that work? So,
After they took the boats away from us, they put us in a schoolhouse up in Iran.
mhm.
And I more or less just didn't much of anything, much of just sitting around
Mhm.
and waiting for a new assignment. And we were free to travel around Iran, and it wasn't a very big city, so it didn't take you very long to see what was around. And
Now, were the local population mostly Arabs, or were there a lot of French people there?
quite a lot of French people, Arab people. In fact, I went to one of the French people's house and had dinner with them one night. They invited me over there, and I had some wine with them and had dinner with them. They were real friendly and courteous and real nice.
Could any of them speak English?
Yeah, they could speak enough English so you could understand what they were saying. So,
Now, were there any problems or warnings about the Arab population?
there did not seem to be any.
Okay.
Everybody seemed to be friendly. You could go into a bar or restaurant and eat, no problem. You got served and no complaints or no nothing.
Okay.
So,
All right. How long do you think you spent then in Iran or that area? You can just give me a general idea if you have one, and if you don't, that's okay.
well, I don't remember the time. I got it wrote down here someplace. But they had a troop transport. They came in there was the Lands, USS Land.
Mm-hmm.
That was troop transport, and their assignment was to bring wounded and transfer different members of the armed forces back to the United States. And they were came back to New York Harbor,
Mhm.
where they unloaded the people they had aboard. So that was when I returned to the Armed Guard Center
Right.
and was given a 30-day leave and went home, then back to Brooklyn again.
Okay. Now this tape is just about done at this point, so we're going to pause right here. So you gave me a convenient. All right. In your story, we had gotten to the point where you had been in Iran and North Africa, and you would eventually come back to the States. So now we're going to be probably early 1943 at this point.
Right.
Come back to New York. You get your 30-day leave. What was it like to go back home again after having, been dumped in the Atlantic and been to North Africa and all of that?
Well, there was not too much going on. I mean, back in the 40s, I mean, there wasn't too much excitement. And my brothers tried to entertain me as much as they could. Take me, to a show or introduce me to lady friends or something like that. I mean, and take me, say like they used to have dances in these Grange halls or whatever it was, and they take you dancing and have a little alcoholic beverages once in a while. I was not in the age limit where you're supposed to be drinking, but I still had some. And back then, I don't think they questioned your age too much. In fact, I looked older than what I was.
Mm-hmm.
So they questioned my brother, and he was old enough, and I wasn't.
All right. And so basically, so you're home for a month, and then you go back to Brooklyn?
Right.
Okay.
I proceeded back to Brooklyn on trains through Detroit and Canada. And back then, riding on a train was a pleasure. I mean, you had nice tracks and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then they stopped at Grand Central Station, and somebody from Brooklyn would pick you up and take you back to the base.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was, after a short period of time in Brooklyn, I was assigned to oil tanker. And that oil tanker was in Chester, Pennsylvania. And it was a new ship. It hadn't been out in the water yet. And all the guns were dirty. They had to be cleaned. And in our process of getting in the river and going down to the ocean, we went to Bayonne, New Jersey, loaded up with oil. And after they loaded us up with oil, we went to Port Arthur, Texas, and unloaded the oil. And then our next stop was Kearsarge, and where we loaded it up with 100-octane gasoline. And after we loaded up with gasoline, picked up a convoy and headed for England. Our first stop was in England, was Bristol, where we unloaded gasoline.
Was the trip over pretty quiet?
It was quiet, and once again, you get in around the British Isles, you run into that fog, you can't see where you're going. And one time we had a ship heading for us and blew the whistle and they turned, otherwise it might have collided with it. But then it's through getting the convoy back together again to get into the harbor.
Now, did you care much what kind of ship you were on? I mean, did you worry that a tanker was more dangerous than a freighter, or did you like it better because it was bigger, or?
Well, the oil tankers were a little different type of ship. Then when you hit rough water, they have a tendency to, where our bunk was back by the engine room, and when you hit a rough streak of water, the steering would sort of bounce, go up and down, and you could feel it. But once again, it was something we were assigned to. Our job was to man the guns and nothing else, and stand watch.
Now, what was your regular watch station on the tanker?
Well, our regular watch station was usually it was on the 5-inch 38. That was an anti-aircraft gun. But the gun I was assigned to was a 20 millimeter, which was beside the 38, 5-inch 38. So when I was called to general quarters, my job was to go to the 20 millimeter to get ready to fire that.
Okay. Now, did you have anything to shoot at on that first trip on the tanker?
No, it was more or less a quiet trip. It was, you just waited for them to unload and they were assigned a convoy and back to Curacao again.
Okay. Now, when you sailed back to Curacao, was the tanker empty, or did they fill ballast tanks? Or
they had a ballast tank that they, to get it down in the water. Otherwise, it stuck way up in the air. But that's what they did. They put a ballast on it, and that's the way they went back and forth, with the gasoline one way and the ballast the other way.
And then how many trips like that did you make?
We made 3.
Okay.
3 trips. And after the 3rd trip, then we were assigned back to Brooklyn again.
Now, over the course of those 3 trips on the tanker, were there any particular events or things that happened that kind of stand out in your memory?
Well, coming out of Cardiff on our final trip, we were told that we were going to fire the guns. So, and they had the anti-aircraft guns. They were supposed to fire at a surface target, a buoy. And that was out about 1,000 yards. And then they released the balloon, and the 20 millimeters were supposed to fire at the balloon. So that was our firing of the gun well, once before we did fire them out on the ocean after we cleaned them to make sure they were all working all right.
But you never saw any German aircraft.
No, we never had any problems with aircraft or submarines. We were, I would say, lucky that we didn't run into any wolf pack or anything.
Well, after the middle of 43, the Atlantic was getting safer. There were still German submarines, but they weren't doing so well anymore.
Right. They were, well, they had more escorts. And, well, I guess the seaplanes used to fly out and look for submarines, and the British and French or whatever used to look for submarines. They were pretty well taken care of by the time we go over there with a oil tanker.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, about how long would it take to get from Curacao to England, do you think?
15 days.
Okay. And then when you got to England, did you get to stay on shore for a while? And
We were given the privilege to take a liberty to travel around the locality where you were at, Bristol or Cardiff or Liverpool.
did you ever make it to London?
No, I never got to London. With an oil tanker, you're not there too much of a length of time.
Mm-hmm.
They get in one day and they're unloaded by the next day. So they're getting rid of their load in a quick hurry.
Mm-hmm. And what about on the other end? When you went into Curacao, did you get to hang around on shore for a while?
It was the same procedure. We would have a chance to travel in and take liberty and view the locality as much as possible. And if you had a little money, you could take a taxi cab around.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time you walked, because the $21 a month don't go very far.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you sending any money home at that time, or were you?
I did eventually took out war bond.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe I might have been sending $10, $15 a month home. That was after I got a pay raise. When I went to Seaman second, Seaman first, I got a little more money, so I sent, I think it was $15 I sent home.
All right. Okay. Now, after you make the 3 round trips with the tanker, what assignment did you get next?
I was reassigned back to Brooklyn again. And after the reassignment at Brooklyn, they sent me over to Pier 92 in New York, where we were just waiting transportation or waiting assignment to another ship or whatever. And so we was finally assigned to the Montcalm, the USS Montcalm, which was a tugboat.
Mm-hmm.
And when you went any place, you took the train, and so we took the train from Grand Central Station to Key West, Florida, well, to Miami, then to Key West, and we went to the Key West Air Base, and then from there they transported us to a minesweeper, and the minesweeper took us to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where we was assigned to the USS Montcalm.
All right. So now you're in Guantanamo Bay on a tugboat?
In Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And our duty aboard the Montcalm was to do whatever they were assigned. I mean, we went to a number of other islands, and we would pick up empty barges and haul them back to Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And one time a ship run aground on the south end of Cuba, and we were assigned to hook onto that, try to pull it off of the beach. And that was one of the more major assignments we had. And along towards the end of our assignment down there, we hauled target for use for firing from destroyers. They'd get out on in the Caribbean, and they'd shoot at that target for a couple thousand yards or whatever, 5,000.
Did you get to spend a lot of time on shore in Cuba or the other islands?
Well, in Cuba they had what's called Gitmo City, and that was more or less one of our liberty ports for the Guantanamo Bay people. Was Gitmo City. You had to take a boat over to one of the small cities, then they ride a train to Gitmo City. That was what they called our liberty. And I was in Puerto Rico, San Juan a couple of times, and I was in Kingston, Jamaica, and I was in St. Lucia and Martinique, and we was assigned to, I don't remember the name offhand, but there was an island off of South America that we went to.
Trinidad, maybe?
Yes, it was. It was Trinidad. Yeah. And but most of the time the assignments we were given were to go pick up empty barges and bring them back to Cuba.
But how many armed guards do they have on a tugboat?
They were regular Navy.
Yeah, but how many of you were there?
I think only two that I know of. But after you'd been sunk, I guess, and had quite a lot of combat, they more or less didn't assign you to a combat ship. They more or less assigned you to a non-combat ship to give you a break.
So you've taken enough risks by then?
Right.
All right. Yeah, when you were out sailing on those ships and you're accumulating points and so forth, eventually toward discharge, do you get more points for being on a tanker or being on the North Atlantic run or things like that?
You got points for sea duty. I think you got more points for sea duty than being on land, but you gathered over a period of time. I don't remember exactly. I think you had to have 21 points or something like that.
It was a lot more than that to get out. 80 something to start with to get out, and it went down eventually. But anyway, didn't know if they were keeping track of that for you then. About how long do you think you spent in the Caribbean? Or were you still there at the end of when the Germans surrendered in 45?
I came back from Gitmo. I don't have here how long, but the war was over when I come back from Cuba.
Okay. So you're still on Cuba in May of 45 when the Germans surrender.
Right.
Okay. But your enlistment's not over yet. You're still in the Navy.
No.
So what did they do with you after Cuba?
Well, I came back to Norfolk, and then they, out of Norfolk, they give me another 30-day leave, and I came back home and spent my 30 days doing whatever I could around home, and then when my 30 days were up, I reported to Detroit, in the Detroit recruiting station, and from there they shipped me to Bremerton, Washington, and to the Navy base. And while I was waiting assignment there, they gave me something to do. I worked in the Navy laundry, drying clothes, putting clothes in the wash machine and dryer, spin dryer, dryer.
So did that make you want to go to sea again?
Well, it didn't bother me. I mean, I was used to doing most anything anyhow. So, and then you could travel around Bremerton and different places and see what sights there was to see.
Could you go down to Seattle, or was that too far?
I don't think I went to Seattle. I just more stuck around locally. And
then did they put you on another ship eventually?
Yes, I was assigned to the Voland. Well, in fact, there was a pretty good group of armed guards people that went to Birmingham. And I wouldn't say how many, maybe 10 that were in our group, and we were all assigned to the Voland. But there was one man in particular, he lived here in Grand Rapids, and Samuel Johnson, and I was, because I was a higher ranking member of that group, they gave me the assignment to take them to the Voland and report to the deck officer, and from there we were given our bunk assignments, and my assignment on the Voland and the Montcalm were both, my duty was wheel watch. So when I was on duty, my duty was to steer the ship, keep it on course. So when I got on the Voland, that was my watch, wheel watch.
Now was the Volant, then was that a Navy ship?
I was a Navy USS Moreland. That was a supply ship.
Okay.
They went from one port to another port, dropping off supply. And on the bowlines they had two men on the wheel. One would go on for a little while, and the other man would relieve him, and he'd go on for a while. We'd switch back and forth because it gets pretty boring staying there watching the compass and trying to stay on course.
Now, where did you sail to then?
From Bremerton, we went out to the Puget Sound and headed for Okinawa, and that took 30 days.
Now, had Japan surrendered yet, or was the war still going on?
They had surrendered. They dropped the atomic bomb, and I think they dropped the atomic bomb while I was on leave back in August.
They did. Okay.
And so that was already over with, and so we stopped to Okinawa and unloaded with supplies we were assigned. But in Okinawa, the typhoon had just went through there. So the harbor was quite a mess. And so we unloaded and we went to Sasebo.
That's in Japan.
Right. That's more or less a main port. And then from there we did our route up to Nagasaki. We could see all the damage that the atomic bomb did to the cities, the docks and everything. And then we went up to Kiri, and then eventually we went to Wakayama. I think Wakayama's not too far away from Kiri. And Hiroshima's right in the same area. And Kiri and Wakayama and Hiroshima. But my duty aboard the Volans beside Wheel Watch was running borderline. So when I wasn't on Wheel Watch and they were in the harbor, I operated the whaleboat to transport people from one ship to another, or over to the beach, or take them over to Liberty. And I was a helmsman. So,
Did you get to go ashore in Japan yourself?
I was ashore, but not on Liberty like the other guys did. I more or less stuck to operating the boat, and I didn't really take liberty or anything.
So you really didn't see much of the Japanese people themselves?
No.
Okay. Did you have did you have any particular attitude toward the Japanese at that point, one way or another, positive or negative, or did you not really worry about it?
No, the only Japanese people I seen was down on the dock, and most of them were young kids that were just looking around to see what was going on. And in fact, they had a pile of Japanese rifles on the dock. If you wanted one, just go over and get it, pick it up and take it with you. So I picked one up and took it back, brought it back home with me. And my granddaughter's got it down in Alabama. So That was a, well, what do you call it, a World War II souvenir.
Right.
And I got the rifle and the bayonet. I still have the bayonet yet. And
Now, did you stay with that ship, or did you get to go home before it came back?
I got off, I had enough points to get off. And Yeoman, when I come back with the boat, he wanted to know if I wanted to go home, and I told him, yes, I want to go home. And he said, well, get your sea bag packed and get up here. And I was gone within an hour. I just threw everything into the bag, and he had the papers already made out, so all I had to do was sign them, and away I went.
Now, how did they get you back home?
I got on a American destroyer. I don't know, I don't think I got the name of it, but it was a two-stacker. And they took me back to Sasebo, and from the Sasebo I got on another troop transport, and went up to the northern route down to San Francisco, and I was on Treasure Island for a while.
Was the voyage back to San Francisco an easy one, or did you get bad weather?
Well, I don't think there was anybody in my group off in the Lowlands that was, I was the only one on that.
Right.
But, and I was the only one that is assigned to Treasure Island. There was other people there, but I made friends with a couple of other sailors, and in fact the food wasn't too great there, Navy food, and one of the men that was assigned to Treasure Island, he lived right there nearby, so he said, why don't you come over to our house for dinner? And we went over to his house, and his wife cooked up the same food that they give us at Treasure Island. It tastes an awful lot better. And she did a real good job of cooking up dinner for me. But that was something of an enjoyment.
Now, did you have a specific assignment at Treasure Island?
No, just wait your time. And
So when did they finally discharge you then?
well, out of Treasure Island, they took me over to Oakland, where, well, I think we went over to Oakland about 4 hours in the afternoon, and we got onto a train and headed out of Oakland. I think we headed out of Oakland about 7 o'clock, and it was a Pullman. You had your own bunk and everything. So they made up the bunks, they fed us, made up the bunks, and so they cleared the bunk. Woke up the next morning and looked out the window, and there was snow all over the place. And I asked the conductor, I said, where are we at? He said, Utah. And I said, Utah? And it looked like there was about 4 foot of snow out there. And from then on we went to Denver. And we went through Denver, and when we come out of the mountains, you could see Denver sticking up in the air. And I asked the conductor, I said, "What's that?" He said, "Denver." So you can see it quite a ways off in the distance. They call it the Mile High City.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went to Denver, and our next stop was Great Lakes. We numerous stops to take on water or whatever, and one of the great sailors decided that there was a store off over by the railroad track, and he decided to go over there and get some beer. Well, he went over and got the beer, and the train started up while he was on his way back. And I guess he lost part of his beer on the way back. Running, he caught the train all right, but he lost half of his beer, I think.
And then from Great Lakes, do they process you quickly, or do you sit around for a while first?
It was pretty good. Well, I was like just assigned the OGU again, and you go through your physical, dentist, and your physical. They want to make sure that you're nothing physically wrong with you. And my only problem that I told them was my hearing, and they decided that wasn't enough loss to require any special treatment. So then my next assignment was to find a train to get back home again.
So when did you finally get back home?
That was the 22nd of December, 1945.
Now, did your family know you were coming?
As far as I know, the best of my remember, I think I wrote a card to them or a letter and told them I was where I was at. My mother used to keep my letters, and in fact she even had some when I was on the Montcalm, the voyage. And I wasn't a great writer, so I got it when I got a little coaxing for other people to write home. So my writing wasn't my better part of my intelligence, so I did the best I could.
All right. Now, once you got back home, what did you do?
Well, the normal procedure was to register with your local draft board and to make sure your discharge papers were all registered with the county clerk, and you were given unemployment compensation until you could find a job. And well, we lived back out in our own stamping ground, our own home out in the Cascade area, Whitneyville area. And I lived with my parents, my mother and father, and that's where I lived when I found a job, and would drive back and forth from that area to my job, which was about 17 miles.
What kind of job did you get?
I was worked for a company which they called Doler Jarvis. It was a manufactured die-cast manufacturing company that made die-cast parts, and they chrome plated them,
Mm-hmm.
and for automobiles and refrigerators and wherever they could get a bid on a part.
Mm-hmm.
And I started out as a buffer. I buffed the part for chrome plating, and I eventually switched to what they call polishing. That was taking the burr off of the part before they buffed it, and that was what I did mostly, was polishing.
Mm-hmm.
And they, instead of calling it polishing, they call it deburring.
Right.
You take the parting line off from the product.
Now, did you stay with that company a long time, or did you move around?
I worked there for 29 and a half years, and they closed up in 1975. So I do unemployment for about a year after they closed up. And my last job I had was handyman in a tool and die shop. I did about everything there. Unloaded trucks, cleaned up ships, swept the floor, drove a truck. I was just sort of a handyman.
And when did you get married?
I was married twice. I was my first marriage was 1959.
So you waited a while.
Yeah. Well, I think I was going on 25.
Mm-hmm.
And when my second marriage, I was 1960.
Mm-hmm.
And my second wife, well, she passed away 2 years ago, the 1st of September of 2009.
And how many kids did you have?
5 by my first wife,
Mm-hmm.
and none by my second wife.
Okay.
She had 3 that she had from previous marriages.
Mm-hmm.
So, but with my second wife, we had no children.
And how many grandchildren did you wind up with?
How many grandchildren?
Yeah, or is that not a fair question?
Well, you can count them out. With 5 children, one brother had 10, and another brother had 5 children, and my daughter had 5, and my one son had 2, and my other son had 2.
That's getting
There's 3.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Right.
All right.
Then my daughter, her daughter, my granddaughter, had children, and her children had children. So I got 3 great-great-grandchildren.
Wow. All right. To look back a little bit now over the time that you spent in the Navy, what effect do you think that had on you? Did you learn something from it, or did you change or grow up at all while you were there?
Well, being in the Navy, I mean, over a period of time, you gain a little more respect for the people that were worse off than you were, that and had worse battle experience. I had minor battle experience compared to what some of them did have. Like you were on an aircraft carrier and kamikazes blew up your ship or battleships that got into big battles with the Japanese. You learned a lot more respect for what they did than what you did. So I had a brother in the Marines during World War II, and he was aviation. He loaded aircraft and took care of the gun.
Okay, so he's like an armorer.
Yeah, he was. Cleaned them, loaded them, get them ready for flight again. And I had another brother who was in the Korean War. He was a radio operator in the Marines. So, and one of my sons was in the Army. He got drafted during the Vietnam War. So he spent 24 years in the Army. So he had all kinds of experiences. He didn't get to Vietnam, but he got to Germany and a tour of duty in Korea. And he retired from the Army as a command sergeant major. And after he got out of the Marines, he went to school and he got a job as an engineer on the railroad. So that was what he was doing before he passed away from cancer. So he had a lot of experience with the services.
If you had it to do over again, would you go join the Navy again as a teenager?
I would. I've seen what some of the men in the Army had to go through. In the Navy, if you got sunk, you was in the water. But possible sense, I survived. And on land, you might have been a survivor too. But when you were in, like over in the Pacific, when they were in the jungle, and people had malaria and dysentery, and over in Africa, they crawled around in the mud. And so I thought I was pretty fortunate. I had clean clothes all the time. I didn't have no mud on my uniform or crawl around in mud.
So the Navy was a good choice.
Right, I think it was.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the story here before we close out the interview?
Well, if there's any young people around the United States, I would advise them to take a chance on the Navy. I got a story right here in the paper that tells all the privileges, all the things you can do in the Navy in Great Lakes, all the training you can get. And it can mount up to enough training to qualify you for a job when you got out as a machinist, electrician, or variety of jobs, an engineer. So there's all kinds of opportunities in the Navy in Great Lakes. And I would advise young kids to take a shot at it.
All right. Well, I'm sure the Navy recruiters will appreciate that
Right.
and give them some help. All right, then. In that case, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, I appreciate your being here and appreciate you taking the time to listen to my side of the story.
Very happy to. All right. That will be a wrap.